Good morning, North America. Welcome to Church Talk TV. Lively talk about life, church, and church life. I'm your co-host, Dr. Bill Tenney-Britton, and I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, Dr. Kris Tenney-Britton, and we're broadcasting from our studio in Columbia, Missouri, the heartland of America. Say good morning, Kris.
Well, good morning, and welcome to Church Talk TV.
Kris and Bill Tenney-Britton here to talk about community-centric church planning for real impact in 2024. You don't know this because there's several reels on the floor because we have got the date wrong, we have got the time wrong, we have got the station wrong. This is a comedy of errors, none of which you get to see because we don't do outtakes. There you are.
But let's get this clarity in there. We are talking about church planning with ends. Planning,
That's
not
right.
Church planting. So
Which
I know
could
that
be in your
it's
church
easy
planning for
Right,
2024.
yeah. Wouldn't that be awesome?
Yeah.
So hey, to put it out there. So we are starting with your outcomes in mind. If you're going to do any kind of planning, we talked about this just I think last week. You've got to have outcomes in mind. And let's be real. We're looking at 2024 already.
It's like it's only
that's in 10 days.
Yeah,
I mean, literally,
right,
10 days. And thinking the 21st of December. Now we've got 10 days. So if you don't have your goals, your outcomes in mind for 2024, I don't know when you're going to.
Well, and last week, the conversation was about doing a postmortem for ministry failure, and one of the top reasons why there are failures is because the plans don't begin with outcomes. What is it we are trying to accomplish with this ministry? So as you sit down to start your planning, before you do anything, sit down and say, what are the outcomes that we want to accomplish this year? What clear goals do we have that we want to accomplish? Now, whether it's an attendance goal, a financial goal, a disciple-making goal, or, I like this one, a baptism goal of converts, people who have become new Christians, not the biological thing. It's great to have kids get baptized who were raised in church. That is wonderful, but with the rise of the nuns and the shrinking number of people who do church, hey, folks, we've got to get serious about evangelism and discipling and bringing in new people into the faith. That's kind of the thing Jesus said, his last words in Testament, go ye therefore and, making disciples.
Yes,
and a good
indeed.
disciple makes more disciples.
Right.
So what are the outcomes you want in 2024?
Okay, so I want to visit because you said post-mortem, and this is the time to do a post-mortem, right? An autopsy.
On 2023.
On 2023.
Exactly
and maybe
right.
that's better. Do an autopsy on 2023, right? What did not work for you? What was not fulfilled? If indeed you did your outcomes for 2023, even if it was for any part of 2023, go back and look. What didn't work? And why didn't it work? What could you have done different? Should you have done differently? Blah, blah, blah. Watch last week's episode. Now, you may be saying, come on, Bill, Kris, you keep doing this. You keep talking about that. Yes.
There's a reason for that.
Right, because my guess is if you're watching this, it's because you haven't done it yet. So please, 2024 is upon us.
I had a conversation today with a client who we were talking about what he hopes to accomplish in 2024. We were talking about planning. And one of the things he said is that this year, as you look back on 2023, there was a whole lot of things on the calendar that did not get done. Ooh. He said we had things that we'd said we wanted to do, and then we just didn't do them. He says, and we've got to have conversations about accountability and about making sure that things go on the calendar and that we have leaders who are responsible for making sure that each of those events moves forward. And it's like, brilliant, that's part of the outcome and it's part of the planning.
Right.
Outcomes and leadership.
Right. So we want to be envisioning to do that. We want to envision the desired impact for our congregation and for the community.
What's going to change out there?
Right, the church inside and outside. And if you want to impact your community, then you've got to be thinking about how you're going to inspire and impact your congregation as well. But not one and not the other. They really do go hand in hand.
So often, and we see this in so many churches, there's a lot of emphasis put on what are we going to do with our congregation. We want to turn our members into disciples. And I can tell you that has probably been the goal for many, many churches for many, many years.
For sure.
And the question is, how's that working for you? Because if you have a church full of church members who aren't making more disciples, and you've been doing discipling for XYZ years, just continuing what you've been doing is not going to change that. And therefore, if you're going to sit down in 2024, what are the outcomes? And then what are we going to do that's different if we've been trying to get these outcomes for some time?
And if you're serious about that, and and so often, don't ask yourself yes and no questions, right? Have you been discipling? Yes, no. Well, a lot of us will say yes and argue yes. And
every sermon's a discipling sermon, right? Yeah.
No. I mean, the questions are things like, how many people have been discipled? How do you know that? What does that look like? How is their life different? How are they making a change in their neighborhood, on their block, on their apartment floor?
How are their behaviors different?
Right.
And yes, the rest of that as well.
What are your stories? I mean, that's what I used to say to people, right? I mean, when I coach pastors, I'll ask, tell me a story. I need to see numbers, right? But tell me a story. And if you don't have stories, then you're not doing that work. Or maybe you're doing the work, but not effectively for what your outcome is.
That's right. If you're not getting the outcomes, if you're not getting the stories, then there's something wrong with something. It's either the premise, or it's the planning, or it's the implementation. It's going to be one of those three things.
Or in the implementation, I think this is part of implementation. It does go back to what kind of groundwork do we need to be doing, right? If you want a discipling congregation, you've got to disciple some people, but it's not all about you. So it's, who am I discipling and how am I bringing them along so that they're also discipling, right?
That's right.
So maybe you disciple 2 people. Now in 2024, that should be 4 or 8 people.
And the others should be discipling others.
Right.
Are you handing it off? Is it working like it's meant to be? It's meant to be an exponential growth of disciples and church growth for that matter.
Okay,
let's be honest.
So we're talking about disciples here, and we know, right, discipleship, we know that we're not just talking about that, right? We talked about our different outcomes, our different goals. So
we're inside and outside.
Inside and outside. To get there, you've got to set measurable and realistic goals, also known as SMART goals. And I said this before we started today, that I can never remember what SMART, like just off the top of my head. So you're going to tell us.
Yeah, that's great. So SMART stands for really intelligent, you get it, and, oh, wait a minute, that's not the kind of SMART we're talking about. All right, SMART is an acronym for, it is a specific goal. Okay, it's specific. We know exactly what that goal is. There's no ambiguity whatsoever. It is a measurable goal. Listen, if you can't measure it, you can't tell whether you have achieved it or not. And so what I get, and you get this all the time as well, we've both done articles. We have different perspectives on how to get it accomplished, but we both say you can measure whether someone is becoming a more mature disciple of Jesus Christ.
Right.
It is measurable. And that's between them and God. If it's between them and God, then why is there church discipline, et cetera, et cetera? The bottom line is, that's right. You need to be able to, and there's stuff on our blog posts. Yeah. You've got articles in Net Results Magazine. Right. There's lots of stuff out there to talk about how to measure that. So it has to be measurable. How many butts in the seats? How many baptisms? How many bucks? How many people reading their Bibles? I like the B words today.
I like the Bible.
Anyway, so, et cetera. So what are your measurables? Okay. Specific, measurable, ambitious. Are they ambitious goals? In fact, if they're not ambitious, they're probably not God goals.
Yeah.
And here's the deal, folks, is we need some God-given vision, because we keep doing little bits here and little bits there and not even achieving that because we're not taking a big enough bite of the apple.
Yeah, well, you make me, as you're saying, you make me think how many people will, it's like, oh, that's just too big, or, oh, we can't do that. Well, you know what? If you can't, then you won't. You never will. Right. So, yeah, it's that audacious, right? It's that
ambitious, right? Audacious, yeah,
right?
That's right.
Audacious, right? It's
BHAG.
Ambitious.
It's BHAG. That's
right.
what Colin says. Big, hairy, audacious goal.
So yeah. Anyways, there it is.
Right. Okay. So it's SMA. Okay. So specific, measurable, ambitious, and then do you have responsibility? does someone have responsibility? Who is the end all be all? Who is taking responsibility for this goal? Here's the deal, folks, is I hear this all the time. We create a goal for our youth pastor, and we want you to grow your youth group by 25%. Man, that sounds great, right?
It's audacious.
Yeah, that's right.
And aggressive.
And unless you hand this is going to sound really bad, but unless you hand the youth pastor a shotgun and say you can threaten people to make them come across the street and come to your youth group, that's not a reasonable goal. It's not a responsible goal. It's a goal that doesn't work because you can't hold someone responsible for other people's actions.
Right.
What you can hold them responsible for is, did they do all the work to make sure that the doors were as wide open? Did we do our marketing? Did we do our relationship building? Those are our words again. Did we do what we needed to do to make sure that we could bring people in? Now, if they've done all that and it still didn't work, then the question is, what do we need to change? But throwing a goal of, again, the numbers that are just flat out, we're going to have worship attendance of 250, unless you're going to somehow coerce people, you're going to have to create conditions that make that possible. And that's the goal that you're setting. Okay, so specific, measurable, ambitious, responsible, and last one is time-bound. When are you going to get it done? It's a time-dated thing. It's, in the next year, in the next month, in the next week. So we're doing 2024. So it's this year.
Yeah. Well, and you have to break it down.
Right.
Right. Okay. So here's your goal, your outcome that you're working with, but you've got to break it down. What are your mileposts? Right. What are your milestones? What will there be in place in 2 weeks, like January 15th? What about January 31st?
Work backwards.
Right. Yeah.
And reverse engineer, and know that.
Say more. What do you mean?
Reverse engineer. Start with the end in mind.
Right.
End
exactly.
end isn't just in the beginning. You have to start with the end in mind.
Right.
And remember that growth and a lot of these things work on an exponential curve, which means it's not a linear curve.
Right.
It starts here smaller and goes up. So if you just do the straight out, this is the incline to what it's supposed to be, you're going to find that you're not able to get you're trying to get an extra 100. You're not going to get 25 at the end of the first quarter and 50. And so it's not going to work that way. It becomes, you start 5 or 10, 15, and they invite, and there you are. Then you have your exponential, but it's a curve. So just be aware that when you're setting your mileposts, you have to set them realistically as well as, as well as the rest. So there's your SMART goals. And every outcome, every goal you set needs to have all 5 parts. It needs to be a SMART goal, and you need to have a list of outcomes. All right, so that's what you start with.
Okay, and then you've got to build the foundation. Build the foundation of your outcomes on needs and aspirations, right? And so there are a couple 3 different parts of that. One is that you have to align your plans with the actual needs and aspirations of the community
and your congregation.
I was thinking community inside and outside your door, right? So communities, the church's community. So you're going to look at what are the needs, right? What are the needs and the hopes, if you will, those aspirations of your communities, and how do you bring them together?
That's right. Okay, so we're talking about needs and aspirations. We're talking about the needs. That can get really ephemeral.
Yeah.
And so let me just share what I have found to be the most effective way of describing or defining needs. What keeps people up at night?
Yeah.
Okay. What are they losing sleep over? What are they worried about? I don't know anyone who went to sleep the other night thinking, man, I really wish I understood what Advent was all about. I really wish I knew what Advent was. If I could just figure out Reformation, et cetera, et cetera. No one lost any sleep. In fact, the truth is, Pastor and church leader, nobody in your community lost any sleep last night, last week, last month, worrying about whether or not they were going to hell. They're all convinced they're going to heaven. And when we shake our Bible at them and say, hey, well, the Bible says, they just look and say, well, I don't believe that. A loving God wouldn't say, well, the Bible says, yeah, that's your book, not my book, and etc.
Well, I'm thinking projection, right?
Yeah,
how we project
do.
onto others, right?
Yeah.
So it's not what I think, you think, it's what they're thinking, what they're
with
doing.
Their needs
right,
and aspirations.
exactly. And the needs and aspirations of the community outside are more than likely the needs of your community within the church, right?
That's absolutely true.
Right, your church is made out of people there, right?
No one in your church is losing sleep over the Trinity or Advent or
now, some
or
of them
going to hell.
may be, interested in that.
Right, absolutely.
Seen that, and there's even been an expectation built up in our congregations over
absolutely.
decades and decades and decades that people have inherited that make them think that's what they need to know. This is something else I'm thinking about in this, because I'm really liturgical. I say liturgical. I really do
way
follow
more than me.
Well, yeah, I mean,
right,
we've established that over the years. But I do think in terms of Advent and then Christmastide and then Epiphany, right, and around the circle, this kind of wheel, and that helps me at least kind of think of the movement of what we can be focusing on, right, getting our hearts ready for what, but that's in my thinking and my thought processes, not necessarily what I'm teaching out there. The other piece that has gone there for me, though, when I've pastored is I've shaped my worship around that, and I would do that much differently now. I mean, I'm thinking back 25, 30 years ago, probably 25 years ago, where I was shaping everything around Advent. So when I sat down and did my planning out for the year, it would be, how are we going to celebrate Advent? How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? And then I guess about 20 years ago, I got to thinking, okay, let's not do that so much as let's say, where do I want my congregation to be at the end of this coming year, and what do I need to do to help them get to that?
Well, I like your path that you're talking about.
Yeah,
and
circular.
Culture has a path, the same thing. It's a different church year or a different community year.
Yeah, that's right.
And that if we're going to be serious about community-centric church planning, that means community out there. Where are they? And so for them, Christmas didn't start on the first Sunday of Advent. Christmas began for them, depending on whether they were Walmart shoppers or Target shoppers. In Walmart, they started in August. In Target, they started in September or thereabouts.
October.
October, somewhere there. I mean, I'm being facetious there, but the reality is that the cultural wheel is very different. And it's okay to, don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating
I play with it.
Right, exactly.
I mean,
you can bring them together.
But
the key is, if you're going to be community-centric, you have to also at least take into consideration what their cycle is and how do we make touch points. And we start with, again, coming up with what are their needs, what are they losing sleep over, what are their aspirations, what do they want to accomplish with their life, with their family, with their health, with all the rest of that. And then as you come to understand that, then you can begin building programming, sermon series, etc., based on what you've discovered from them. And again, you have to find out from them because you can't project.
So that's what I want to jump onto is how do we do that, right? What are some ways that we can engage with and listen to the community? And, we've talked about things like if you live in a town with a mall or whatever, go and sit in the mall area, like the food court and whatnot. But different things, different ways, or look at the news. I get 3 daily news we live in Columbia, Missouri, for Columbia, and I see, these are the same news items that keep showing up, or this one particular item is something that's showing up. That tells me that the people who are reading that's an issue for them. How am I going to address that?
And you can look at the comments and the shares and all that to see how much energy is
getting. And so now you're talking about the people who are coming to church who have, they're at the very least aware of it, and maybe experiencing that. And then you've got the people out there who are hearing about it, experiencing that. And I mean, we hopefully all of us know that the more you hear something on the news, what may not really have been an issue at all, it becomes an issue because it keeps repeating and glommed onto.
And you just look at the comments, which will probably just mad.
It self-perpetuates.
Yeah, it does. It just builds and builds and builds.
And if you do Facebook or anything like that, you can get on Facebook and you can have a page for your local community. Look at your local community's Facebook page, or where people are commenting, going in there. Go ahead. Groups.
Yeah.
Okay, groups. Yeah. I mean, some other ways. Definitely, you've got to be in conversation with your police chief or your community
leaders.
Right. Yeah. All of those. And
let me just build on all of those, because one of the things that we often forget is, who are the influencers in our community?
Yeah.
Well, the influencers in our community, let me say that anyone who has to run for office, they know a lot of people. So and they know how to influence people. Yeah. And they influence influencers. And so they're great people, your city council members, your county council members, again, your mayor, and others along those lines, because they are well connected. Your Chamber of Commerce executive director is another one. And most of the nonprofit directors, they have lots of, they have to network with these folks. So these are people to have conversations with, besides which, of course, are the rank and file people who make up your outreach avatar, the people you're trying to reach for Jesus Christ through your church. And again, if you're saying everyone, then please go and find our episodes on our avatar, because if you're reaching everyone, I got news for you, you're not reaching anyone.
Yeah.
So,
exactly. All right, go.
Right. So,
go.
So the key is having those conversations. The reality is that as we begin to understand the aspirations, the needs of our community, things they're losing sleep over, then it's time to start beginning with planning with our community in mind. And again, I agree with you, communities, there's two communities. However, just remember this: if you preach a sermon or a sermon series that is designed specifically for your members, when someone from outside, if a visitor does happen to come, if there's nothing else for them, nothing there for them, if there's nothing other than just warm and fuzzies, or the opposite, which I've seen in a number of pulpits, as they're doing this, you the members need to, the bully pulpit, they're not coming back,
right?
Because there was nothing there for them. And the last I checked, when Paul in 1 Corinthians said, I'll be the poor to the poor, I'll be rich to the rich, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll be whoever I need to be in order to reach and save some. The bottom line is, folks, we need to preach to our congregation, but it's that double entendre for those of you who went to seminary, the double-sided thing, or the double sight thing. You got these, but you also have to see these, and you have to be speaking to both communities all the time. And my advocation always is, start here, because it also applies here.
Okay, so this is not as hard as it may sound.
No, it really isn't.
Because remember, people in the community are people in your church, and vice versa. Right. So I hear this, so I'm saying, when you tell me, or when someone tells me, oh, my people don't want to hear about that. No, because they're like hiding inside your church, possibly. Build a bridge. And I'm not talking just about building a bridge to reach people. I'm talking about building a bridge to be able to talk about issues. You may have to talk about it a little differently. You can do a little more inspiration for your people that are in the pews, a little less maybe for those you think are going to push back. They're going to be people who are going to push back, because all they want is the same heady stuff, the Trinity, the blah blah, or the whatever, but connected to them. And I want to say one more thing. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I know time is ticking. Again, when I was preaching, and I'll do this even when I'm visiting churches, I go up there and I look at what the last murders that have happened, the radio, police radios, 911 calls, etc., what's showing up in their local paper, and then I use that to address it. And it's like, come on, y'all, didn't you hear about just the other night, that woman who was accosted? I don't want that for our children, my grandchildren, or our grandchildren. I want something different. So I'm addressing there. People are like, oh yeah, okay, I saw that, or I know that. And I'm hitting people out there. I've built a bridge.
Now, I want to bring some clarification, because when she says issues, she's not talking about preaching sermons on the social issues.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
Okay,
No.
I want to define that.
Right.
What we're talking about is the issues that people are actually facing in their actual lives, not big cultural things. But again, you got the murder. We don't want this happening to our family. The woman was abused or whatever.
Right.
And so that becomes a part of, okay, how do we have relationships that are safe and et cetera? And that's what people are losing their sleep over. They're losing sleep over the relationships that they have to deal with, or their finances, or what are their lose sleep over. And safety in a lot of communities, that is an issue.
Safety, fear. If you aren't familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, go look up Maslow, Mazlow, and his hierarchy of needs. And it's an older construct, and it's been, fooled with over the years. But look up the original. Oh my gosh, just the basic needs people are dealing with. Safety comes safety. Then there's belonging. You'll see people in your
struggling with
and
very
you'll
levels.
see, how are you going to address that? And how are you going to get them to where they're being all God's created them to be and doing all Jesus needs them to do? Preach out Maslow. How's that? Okay, we'll keep going because we're out of time.
Exactly.
Let's go.
Okay, well, I was going to say, I'm not sure I want to say preach out Maslow, but...
Preach out of Maslow. In your community.
I wouldn't go there either.
Okay,
but it's a nice construct to use for understanding the needs of your community. Because here's the deal, folks. When you're doing your planning, okay, there's two primary things you're going to be planning for. You're going to be look at your calendar, and you say, we have these events. And there are some very key events that you want to be placing onto the calendar. Right. But the questions is what are those events there for? What needs are being addressed?
Right.
What are they losing sleep over?
Or can be addressed.
Right, can be addressed, right. And or what aspirations are we helping people fulfill?
Right.
Achieve.
Right.
There's some communities, a number of communities, and communities within the communities, micro groups that are they're not making the money they want. They really and they don't have the skills or the training to do high-end white-collar jobs, for instance. Sure. So they're looking for a side hustle. They're looking to be entrepreneurs. And I got to tell you, Scripture talks about that. Paul talks about that, about minding your own business. And that doesn't mean mind your business.
That's good.
He means take care of the business. Don't work for anyone. Work for yourself.
Right.
And talking about things like that on how you can build it. I don't want to talk about, you don't want to do a sermon probably on side hustles, but you can certainly talk about, certainly talk about going above and beyond to create a service that will bring in income, blah, 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 blah. There are, again, biblical principles that you can share. So look at your calendars. You put these events on that you already have, that you think you want to have.
Right.
And also look at the needs
Right.
and say, okay, what do we need to have to do that?
Right.
The second thing you're doing, go ahead. Were you going to say anything about
events?
I
think is that you're doing events already. How are you going to transition that, right? If it's working for you, or even if it's not exactly working for you, but people have a lot of investment, don't screw around with that, but figure out how you're going to transition that to be a little bit more. I did this with a congregation not too long ago, and they had this, like a sausage dinner every year at this thing. And so my question back to them was, okay, now how can you turn that into an event that draws people back, draws them in? Like what are you going to do?
Into the church.
Into the church,
not just to bring the money in to pay for their sausage and biscuits.
It was, why don't you do a door prize? Let's think about doing some, right. So you're trying to take what you have and shift it a little bit more. It's the handoff, which if we haven't talked about, we will. Handoffs. Go.
Okay, so the events all the way through. All right, the next thing is, Pastor, it's time to create sermon series that will touch people. And I just want to remind you that the pulpit is not there to be an extension of Sunday school.
Right.
It is not an educational piece. It's an inspirational piece, inspiring people to live differently.
Right.
And I got to say that preaching through the book of Galatians or Ephesians or Leviticus, whatever it is, it's wonderful stuff for Sunday school or for Bible study. But if you want to impact people's lives, if you want to transform your community, let's start with where they are and bring the Bible to them, as opposed to saying, y'all got to come to the Bible. And so starting with what are the needs what are the aspirations, and how am I going to address them? And I love what Andy Romstad shared with us. He's one of our staff members, and he talks about the 4 M's. Every year he works with the 4 M's. Everyone has problems or deals with marriages. Everyone has problems or issues with money, meaning, and he used to call them little monsters, which was his word for kids, but now he calls them little miracles. But there's your family piece. So there's 4 themes that he repeats during the year, and he has other themes as well that deal with the issues of the community. So the key here is do your events and do your sermon planning for the whole year.
And do it together.
Yes, and that's right. So that they meld together, so they complement each other. And here's the key, Pastor. So your congregation knows when you'll be talking about how to get out of debt, so that they can invite their folks, their friends who are head over heels in debt. Yeah. And they know when you're preaching the sermon series on grief, so that they can invite their people who are suffering with grief, etc. If they have that in advance, they can stop inviting people to church and start inviting people to the community-centric planning events that you have put onto your calendar.
Guess what?
We're out of time.
We have to say goodbye.
Hey, good to see you. We'll see you next week.
Have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.